Today's podcast is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be showing you what I show to decision makers. Now, this is an extended version of it. I have a much shorter version when I'm in Washington, D.C. lobbying because we have time restraints, but this is kind of what I'm going over when I'm talking to decision makers trying to get laws changed. My name is Tawnee Preisner, and I am a co-founder of Horse Plus Humane Society. My husband and I founded Horse Plus Humane Society back in 2003. The plus in our name is for horses, plus every other animal that comes along that needs help. I grew up with horses from the time I was very, very little. Horses have always played a huge part in my life, and a little pony here. I was 4 years old. Almost 5, and he was my first pony, and then the horse here is a horse we adopted from the BLM when I was 10, and she was my first official horse. My mom always had horses, but she was my horse, and so I actually trained her how to ride. The organization's been going for 20 years, and it'll be 21 this summer, and we have seen a lot in 20 years, and we're just going to be going over some of the things that I've seen. I will tell you that some of these photos are very graphic, but I feel very strong that if we are hiding what's happening and making it being like, oh, it's too graphic, we don't want to see this or that, it's still happening. And if we show what's happening, it can bring awareness and put an end to it. So that is something that, I try to show what's happening. Now, some of these things we'll get into, I will give another warning for in case you want to skip over it. But do know that if you're skipping over it, you won't be able to be an advocate for that horse or that situation, or have enough knowledge if somebody's asking you about, the slaughter pipeline. It's really important to inform yourself, and just remember, we see these things firsthand, and it can be very hard, but that's why we speak so passionately for the horses, is because we see these things. Before we get further into the slaughter pipeline and how it all works, it's important to know that how these horses are ending up in the slaughter pipeline. There are horses from every discipline that end up in the slaughter pipeline. It can be a show horse, a ranching horse, racing horse, brood mares, rodeo horses, Mustangs, a super expensive racing project horse, big lick horses. I have seen them all in the slaughter pipeline. And, first they start off their career as a very valuable horse, and, they ultimately, in the United States, every horse has a slaughter price on its head. So as soon as that horse becomes unable to do the jobs that its owner wants it to do, it can easily fall through the cracks. So, a lot of these horses, if they get hurt, they don't win, they don't get pregnant again. They all just start falling through, and they're usually given to somebody that's going to give them a good home. And ultimately, they're horse traders, people that are like, oh yeah, I can take the nice old horse, and then it ends up not, the kids lose interest in the horses. Ultimately, they all cycle down here, unless they have a responsible owner, to the auctions. And this is where traders get them, and they'll take them from one auction to another, and it's just this vicious little cycle here. Or they'll go to the traders and go to slaughter. Some auction owners ship horses to slaughter. And I know of 2 confirmed cases where the auction owner actually is purchasing horses and shipping them to slaughter directly. So for an auction owner, he just sits back, has everyone bring the horses to him, he buys them and ships them out. So that happens a lot. And then you have Full Circle Life horse shelters, which are horse rescues that have had extensive training and knowledge on how to accept any horse, regardless of its condition, and bring it into its shelter and work with their veterinarian on whether or not the horse needs humane euthanasia, or if that animal is adoptable and can go on to find a loving home. Our position as a Full Circle Life horse shelter is if a horse is suffering, Humane euthanasia is a lot better option than this horrible cycle of the auction, slaughter pipeline, and the slaughterhouse. Since we've been rescuing horses since 2003, there's so many horses have gone to slaughter. It's really just devastating numbers. But in the same aspect, we have to look and say, there is a trend that is going down, and especially the last 4 years, it's significantly dropped. And I think that all comes down to a lot of education. There's a lot more people wanting to do the right thing for their horse. It used to be that you just gave horses away, and you didn't think about taking them to the vet. You didn't think about humane euthanasia. And ultimately, some years back, there was a thing in the news that dogs were dying from dog food, and it came out that there was sodium pentobarbital in the dog food, and ultimately that was because so many people were making the shift that they didn't want their horses going to the slaughterhouse, and they were having their old horses humanely euthanized at veterinarians, that the sodium pentobarbital from the horses that were being taken to the rendering companies, that sodium pentobarbital was getting into the dog food chain and causing a lot of issues. So rendering companies had to crack down on what type of horses they were taking, which did make another problem for disposal of euthanized horses. But ultimately, it was a shift, and I think we see that shift in the drop of numbers, because there are a lot of horses within the United States, but ultimately, when you look at how many dogs or cats there are, it's not that big. So the percentage of horses that are going into the slaughter pipeline now, if there were more responsible horse owners and more rescues willing to step forward to help these horses, those numbers will be dropped out completely. And I do believe the SAFE Act is going to ultimately end horse slaughter. But while we're dealing with horse slaughter in the United States, even though the slaughterhouses have closed within the United States, it's important to know how it's working as far as the slaughter pipeline. So the blue arrows represent horses going to Canada, and the red arrows represent horses going to Mexico. Horses that are very fat, very healthy horses, those horses are the ones that kill buyers and traders are shifting out to go to Canada. And the horses that are skinny, emaciated, falling apart. And some people are like, emaciated horses don't go to slaughter. I have videos of emaciated horses at slaughterhouses, and they are in such horrible shape they can't even walk to the area where they actually kill them, and they will hoist them up and drag them in with a chain and literally hang the horse. It's horrific. So the horses that are going into the slaughter pipeline, a lot of them do get brought into Tennessee before they go to Texas. California, it's illegal to ship horses across the border. I know for a fact that they were. I documented two of the largest kill buyers out there, and one shipped to Canada and one shipped to Mexico. And the one shipping to Canada actually owned an auction where people are bringing horses, and he ended up sending a stolen horse to its death at a slaughterhouse in Canada, and he got arrested for that. So that was the first arrest that happened. The horses are shifting. There's more horses going into Mexico for slaughter than we're exporting into Canada at this point, I believe, because Canada has realized that horse slaughter is such a horrible thing in the aspect that you have all these drugs, these horrible drugs that are entering the food chain for humans. And they're like, the horse meat from the United States is horrible and we can't regulate it. So they have all these quarantine requirements and such. So they are very particular on the type of horses that they accept. And ultimately, Mexico's like, they don't care. So that's why we see so many horses from the United States getting channeled down through Mexico to slaughterhouses. There are a lot of auctions. This one was out in Fallon, Nevada, that won't accept horses that are weak, poor, blind, crippled, stallions. because they're focused on shipping to Canada. And there's actually a feedlot that it's still owned by a Canadian slaughterhouse in Fallon, Nevada. And so the auction is catering to them. They're not shipping to Mexico. They're wanting the best of the best horses. And so in the United States, they're actually like trying to collect the better horses to go up to Canada through that auction. Pennsylvania has a really good law to protect horses going into auctions, that they can't be lame or diseased. And so in Pennsylvania, if a horse comes in that's emaciated or whatnot into an auction, there's actually a law there to protect that horse and get whoever brought that horse to the auction charged. There is room in this law for an injured animal or lame animal to be taken to a medical facility or a place for humane keeping. So this law here is really a good law, and I wish every state in the United States had a similar law to this law to protect horses that are entering the slaughter pipeline. Because if you remember, we go back to that map, there are horses across the United States being taken to auctions and then taken up to the borders, whether Mexico or Canada, for slaughter. So if there was a law like this, it would prevent so many of these horses that are ultimately being taken to auction for traders to pick them up and get them headed in the direction of Mexico. A lot of horses do end up kind of coming into Tennessee and then going to Mexico. So we've seen a lot of horses coming up from Florida at Tennessee auctions, Ohio, all over the East Coast, and basically congregating where the larger traders and kill buyers can just load them up in semi-trucks and send them off to the border. So Tennessee is kind of a hot spot, and the laws are so laxed in Tennessee that you have a lot of the traders bringing horses that maybe other states would say absolutely you can't sell that animal here, but they can bring them into Tennessee and then export them out and avoid any issues because the horses are so broken down. It's just one of their last stops before they go to Mexico. Now we're going to dive into horses we've seen in the slaughter pipeline, and some of these photos obviously can be very graphic. Auction houses are a cesspool of disease, and there are so many horses that are sick, and usually the sick ones, they've been through multiple auctions, and we know that because of their auction tags are usually glued onto their body, and you can see where they've been removed, and another tag and another tag and another tag have been put on their bodies. This draft horse, you'll want to remember him. I'm going to be talking more about him later. This was a young horse that just had a horrific, just his skin was like melting off his body. It was so infected, and ultimately he did not make it. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different horses that we've seen here in Tennessee over the last decade at auctions, and this is all common. And any horse that, there's so many different horses that go into the slaughter pipeline, and this is just an example of one of them. This is a Mustang. A lot of Mustangs do end up in auctions without their titles. They're sold without their titles and ultimately exported into Mexico without their titles. And what I mean by titles is the BLM government, when they round up the Mustangs off public lands, they will brand them. So this is a brand, an identifying brand, and these horses are you're supposed to keep them for a year, and then the government will give you a title. And what's happening a lot is people are buying horses directly from the BLM, adopting them from the BLM, and these horses are ending up in the slaughter pipeline in really bad condition. So this is the same horse from the time we rescued her at auction, and then fully recovered and getting adopted into a home. And that's our goal for every horse. But there are some horses that we get from auctions that are just horrific, and there's nothing we can do for them. Thoroughbred horses also end up in auctions a lot, and we see a lot of them. So this was one horse that we rescued. This was him the year before we rescued him. He was a racehorse, racing and winning money, and then the very next year, he was just a broken down horse at an auction and could easily head to Mexico. This black one here, she was a thoroughbred brought up from Florida, and we're able to tell some of these stories and be like, yes, this was this horse that was racing here, because thoroughbreds have a tattoo in their lip. And sadly, a lot of these traders will try to make it where you cannot read this tattoo, because they don't want it getting back to the person that they took the horses. Like, the person's like, hey, I've got all these thoroughbreds, they're not winning, and the guy's like, well, hey, I'll buy them, or I'll take them, and ultimately they're going into the slaughter pipeline. And so this tattoo will tell you the history of the horse when you look it up. And I've seen numbers of thoroughbreds at auctions where their tattoos have been burnt off, and like their lips are swollen. And if you look up Jack Darling thoroughbred tattoo on Google, it will pull up what was happening with one of the traders, and that trader was bringing horses to this auction here in Tennessee with horses that had freshly had their tattoos burned off, because he didn't want anyone to know where they came from. We do see a lot of draft horses within the slaughter pipeline. There's a lot of Amish communities that use draft horses for working purposes, and this poor horse was in incredible pain. So if you look at these two x-rays here, we have this is called a coffin bone, and that's what the horse stands on. That's all the weight. So, the weight comes off the bones here, and has this little bone that's called the coffin bone, and that's the platform that the horse's hoof is capsuled around. And it's called the coffin bone because if something happens to that bone, it is it's basically the horse is heading to the coffin, I think, is why they call it the coffin bone. But if you look at this draft horse's x-ray, he is completely missing his coffin bone, and it's literally just gone. So he was literally just, there was no bone for him to stand on there, and that was just such a heartbreaking situation. But if, like, Tennessee or federally there was a law that stated that, lame, diseased animals could not be auctioned off, you wouldn't have horses that are in such incredible pain not, being sold at auctions, not even having a coffin bone. It's his case was just absolutely heartbreaking. He stood in the auction yard for hours in this very painful situation, and he wasn't able to escape the pain. If he lays down, getting back up is going to be extremely painful as well, because he has to use all his legs to lay down and get up. So he was just standing there in agony. And his x-ray it's just haunting. It's just to think about how long he suffered, and it's appalling. This is another horse that was dumped at the auction. She could barely walk with her front legs, and she was sick. She'd been through, it's hard to say if she'd been through a lot of different auctions, but she was sick, so that indicates that she had been through other auctions. And her leg was so bowed out. It's just incredible to think about, like, the incredible amount of pain that she was in just standing there. And thankfully we were able to rescue her and give her the last act of kindness. But if there was laws preventing horses from entering the slaughter pipeline, at these auctions in this horrific condition, there's a lot of laws that the USDA has for livestock and cattle, but horses are kind of in this gray zone. They're considered livestock, but the USDA is not inspecting them for slaughter. There's no slaughterhouses that the USDA is inspecting in the United States. So these horses are coming into public auctions like this. And if the state where the auction is has weak laws, these traders can just congregate all these horses before they're shipped to Mexico. And thankfully we were able to purchase her and give her the last act of kindness. But it's heartbreaking that she even had to, go into the slaughter pipeline to begin with. But if there was laws that would prevent that, her owner would have had to take her to a veterinarian or had her, like euthanized. She shouldn't have gone to an auction in this condition. And not all the horses we get at auctions are in horrific conditions. This horse we got from an auction, she was skinny and just a really rough, sad-looking horse. And then she just done so well in her home. And you just see the light coming back into these horses' eyes when they are actually finally getting the proper care they need. It's very, very common to see facial injuries in horses. A lot of these trucks and trailers that bring in these horses, they're overloaded, and they're bashing their faces into the trailers as they're driving down the road. They can really overload these horse trailers, and these horses, they'll come in with open wounds and gashes, and they're not getting medical treatment. So if a trailer unloads a horse, at auction and it has a huge gash, the horse doesn't receive any medical treatment. It's just sold on to the next person, and on it goes to, ultimately slaughter once the wound closes. Emaciated horses are dumped at auctions left and right, and, it's really, really sad that the condition of their bodies. And if it was an animal cruelty case where the laws were stronger, these horses would not be just dumped off at auction where people are getting, a dollar price for their slaughter price. They would be actually getting convicted for animal cruelty. And, for ever, 21 years now, actually going to auctions and documenting what I'm seeing, nothing has changed. And that's why I feel like it's time to really focus on lobbying to get the laws changed and bring what's happening to decision makers, because if we don't, it's just going to continue. And it's time to put the pressure on and put an end to this. I don't know how many horses I've seen dead and dying at auctions, but when horses come in emaciated conditions and they haven't received veterinarian care, they're dehydrated, and a lot of them don't make it, and they die at the auctions. Thankfully, this little guy over here, he made it out, and we were able to rescue him and adopt him into a loving home. But if we weren't at that auction, it's hard to say what would have happened to him. He could have easily been shipped to Mexico. Like, again, I've seen video evidence of horses in this condition at slaughterhouses being slaughtered in Mexico. This is a smaller little pony, dumped at auction with a bunch of other ponies. His whole face is all scraped up, and, he had a lot of problems going on, and we were able to adopt him into a great home. And it's just a cycle of, these horses ending up in the slaughter pipeline. A lot of them can go on to find great homes, and there are a lot of horses that desperately need the last act of kindness in the slaughter pipeline. This is another great success story. Here's this poor emaciated mare, and a lot of people are like, oh, if they're old and skinny, just what's the point of saving them or anything like that? And I don't get their point of view, but there's example after example of horses we rescue from auctions, like this mama and this baby, and given just proper care and nutrition, they're able to go forward and live a great, happy life. But the slaughter pipeline is allowing people to starve and neglect horses and get money for them. And I have seen some horses go through auctions that are completely emaciated. You can see every bone in their body, and these horses are horses that need to receive veterinarian care, not taken to auctions and sold to whoever will pay the most for them. It's a very commonplace in Tennessee to see horses in horrific conditions, and that's why we need stronger laws here. But again, a lot of these horses are being brought into Tennessee to be sold for slaughter. This poor horse is just a heartbreaking situation. And again, we need stronger laws so horses like this are not taken to auction and sold for slaughter. She needs to go to a veterinarian immediately so she's not spending days on a slaughter truck. So her leg is completely messed up here. You see she's got the auction tag on here. She is sold to the highest bidder, and her leg was completely, I mean, it's just devastating to look at this. And I think any layperson can look and be like, that's not normal. It shouldn't be like that. Yet they can go to auctions and be sold for the top dollar. And one thing that's interesting is in the slaughter pipeline, somebody could be like, oh my, that poor horse, who would even buy that horse with that leg like that? If you look at the rest of her body, a kill buyer is going to be like, she has a lot of meat on her, and he'll pay the going price for slaughter price for a horse that is completely broken, because at the slaughterhouse, this leg doesn't mean anything. They're looking at the horse's body. And so you pay 50 cents a pound to get a horse like this from auction, even though she's so broken and falling apart, because she has a slaughter price on her head. But we paid her slaughter price, and we were able to rescue her and give her that last act of kindness so she was no longer suffering. And then this is another success story. This horse we got from an auction, and she had a big gash in her head, and it was just a really poor horse. It was a rough situation, and she got adopted into a very loving home. And it's just so neat to see the progress that she has made with her family, and to go from the auction and the slaughter pipeline to just an amazing show horse. And that just proves that these horses that are in the slaughter pipeline, there are horses that are broken down that need the last act of kindness, but there are horses that can go on to live amazing lives. And that's what we do here at Horse Plus Humane Society. We try to intercept as many horses out of the slaughter pipeline as possible and get these horses that can go on and live amazing lives, to get them out there where they can do that. And then the broken horses that, veterinarians say, this horse has this and this and this wrong with them, and this is causing chronic suffering, and this horse cannot recover, that those horses receive the last act of kindness. And horses like this can go on to live amazing, wonderful lives after being intercepted out of the auctions and slaughter pipeline. This is a horse that was at auction that we rescued, and I believe he was a big lick horse, that his hind end gave out on him, and he ultimately entered the slaughter pipeline, and he's back in, like, just couldn't work well. And he's a stallion, so most likely whoever had him, instead of taking him to a veterinarian being like, hey, what's wrong with this horse, it's not able to walk on all its legs anymore, instead of being like, oh, I need to be a responsible horse owner, this horse is suffering, took it to auction, got a slaughter price, even though this horse is so broken down. And they didn't care if the horse went on to slaughter. And that's where, we need stronger laws to protect these animals. So if they are injured and broken down, that they're taken to a veterinarian. They're not taken to get the highest slaughter price they can. In Tennessee, when we find dying horses at auctions, we have to purchase them so we can get them medical treatment, because you can have law enforcement come through and they'll look around and they're like, well, everyone looked fine to them, because they're not trained, and there's not laws to protect these animals. Like, they are like, okay, so there's really not any law that would pertain to this horse that's at the auction. So law enforcement can walk through and see them and not do anything. So we as rescuers are there, and we're like, this horse is dying, we need to get it medical treatment. But we can't, because we have to own that animal. And so we have to find the person at the auction, who owns the animal, and then say that we want to buy it. And they're like, oh, the rescue wants to buy it. So they'll offer top dollar for it, but they know, like, we pay, the slaughter price for it. So we have to negotiate with that. And ultimately, this horse did die at the auction, and we were able to purchase it, but we couldn't get a veterinarian there to give it any relief and before it passed away. And this is sadly very, very common. And I don't know how many horses I've seen die at auctions or have had just, I get to the auction, there's a dead horse in the background. And I think one of the saddest ones is this horse that was in the back, and you could see where it had paddled its legs trying to get up for probably days, and the amount of manure that was there. That horse was probably there for a good couple days before it died. And it's just heart-wrenching, the things we see. I'm going to restart this little video. So watch when this pony walks through the auction ring. You'll see both his front legs are crippled. So he was an extremely lame pony. This is not him, this is another horse. But that pony was extremely lame, extremely crippled. He wasn't able to walk on his front hooves, yet he was still allowed to go to auction and sold to the highest bidder. And our stance is that if an animal is damaged and needing veterinarian care and assistance, that they should go to a veterinarian. And this would also provide more jobs for veterinarians. Large animal veterinarians are struggling out there. This was another horse here that we purchased at auction. And it's hard to think about the injury that this horse sustained and healed from. And, this didn't happen overnight. So he really, really injured himself somehow. He should have been taken to a veterinarian at that point, and I think any veterinarian at that point would have been like, let's put this horse down immediately. But instead, he didn't have veterinarian care. His leg healed in that broken position, which was causing a lot of problems, weight distribution on his other legs, and he was sold for top slaughter price at the slaughterhouse or at the slaughter auctions, because they know at the slaughterhouse this leg isn't a problem. So the way the current system is set up is if you have an injured horse with this like flopping broken leg, it's better just to leave it in the field until it heals and then take it to the auction and sell it for slaughter, because if it's a fat horse, they'll pay top dollar for that fat horse to go to slaughter. So the slaughter pipeline within the United States is just set up to reward animal abusers and keep animal abusers in the cycle of letting animals suffer, so they ultimately can take them to auction and make money off of them. And these are just a few more. I mean, like this young horse, he couldn't use his leg at all. And he was taken to auction, and he would go on to slaughter. But if there was a law preventing these broken down, crippled horses from being taken to auction, they'd have to go to a veterinarian. That would prevent so much suffering and pain and agony. Now this is going to be a graphic bit here I'm going to talk about, but this is the reality of what is happening. And I've seen a lot at auctions, and this case was the tipping point of we have to try to get the laws changed in Tennessee. In Tennessee, it's legal for anyone who owns an animal to castrate that animal. And this horse was at auction. He went through the ring. We were bidding on him. He got sold to somebody else who kept bidding, and we typically will bid up to where, if the kill buyer's not bidding, we'll pull out. But in this case, it went to someone who was going to try to castrate him. And I have seen horses at the auction sell as a stallion. They go through the ring as a stallion at the beginning of the auction, and then they go back through the auction with blood dripping on their legs, being sold as a gelding. And in Tennessee, it's illegal. It's legal for them to do that. So this poor horse was taken in the back, and he had a hernia. And the person that owned him just took their knife and started cutting, and ultimately he herniated, and we ended up having to purchase him and having our veterinarian put him to sleep. But this is what's going on within the slaughter pipeline, and we are very actively trying to pursue getting the law changed where equines and dogs and cats should be castrated by a veterinarian, not just anyone without any education or anything, just taking a knife to an animal and doing surgeries that can cause extreme pain and suffering and ultimately death. There is a video showing the horse after the person that had him doing the surgery, and we were able to purchase him. Our veterinarian gave him a ton of pain management so he wasn't in pain, and was able to get him to an area where he could be humanely euthanized. I will play it. If you don't want to see it, do just fast forward like a minute or so. And again, remember that this horse does have a huge amount of pain medication on board. And it's just horrific. But this is the reality of what's happening to horses within the slaughter pipeline. When their veterinarian first saw the horse, she's like, this is a dead horse standing, because his intestines were exposed to a very, very dirty environment. After that horse was gutted at the auction with the botched gelding operation, we started a petition. After posting this petition, we were banned from the auction by the auction owners. We are going through steps to get it where they have to allow us back into the auction and saving horses that we can there. But this petition is to strengthen the laws for horses in Tennessee, and it's extremely crucial that this happens. And then also on a federal level, there's different acts and things that we're working on as well to ultimately could end the slaughter pipeline once and for all, making it where horses cannot be exported out of the United States for slaughter. But until that happens, we have to fight and be the voice for these horses. When the auction kicked us out, we went over and we protested, and we were doing everything we can, but they're not letting us back in. We're still intercepting a lot of horses from even going to the auction. So in that aspect, we're still intercepting. But when animal welfare is being discriminated against, and you can't be there because you're speaking out for animals, or you're showing what's happening to these animals, it is a public auction. So there's an ongoing investigation, which we are pretty confident soon will be allowed back into the auction. But part of the biggest reasons horses are struggling in the United States is there are dog and cat laws that are pretty strong within the different states of the United States. There's also very good laws for livestock, saying how they can be raised and handled. But most of those laws, horses are just in this gray zone. From one state to the next, everyone has a different interpretation of livestock. And I'll just give you an example of Tennessee law. There's a definition: animal is, can be a domesticated or previously captured wild animal. Non-livestock animal is pretty vague of what that animal would be, because it's going to be kept around the household or the family, like domesticated animals, or it could be a wild animal, it could be an exotic animal, or any other pet, including but not limited to pets, rabbits, pet chicken, like a baby chick, a duck, a potbelly pig. And then you come over here to livestock, and livestock means all equines. So equines are considered livestock in Tennessee. As well as animals that are produced for fiber and food. But then you come down here, but not limited to cattle, sheep, swine, goats, and poultry. But you have over here that baby chicks and ducks are pets, but they're also poultry. And then you also have a potbelly pig, which potbelly pigs are swine. So it just leaves horses in a horrible gray zone. And it really is difficult in court cases, trying to convict under the pet laws, the non-livestock animal laws, because if they're keeping them around as a pet horse, the lawyers basically chew it up and are like, no, they're definitely livestock because of this, which livestock laws are very laxed here in Tennessee. And it's just a real struggle. And it's a struggle across the United States because various states all have different laws of what a horse, is. But when you have laws that are stronger, if pets get abused versus, livestock, but horses are being kept as pets, primarily in Tennessee. It's just a real struggle. And it's a struggle across the United States, and that's why we see so many horse cases not actually getting prosecuted, and law enforcement being very wary of anything to do with a horse case or a seizure of horses, because they know it's going to be very difficult to actually prosecute. I just want to thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope it was educational. Laws need to be changed for horses, regardless of what state you're in. If you start looking into horse laws, unless you're in a state that's very proactive to protect horses, they're going to be very laxed laws, and different states have different policies and different laws, and so the states that are very laxed on their livestock law, which horses fall under, are the ones we'll really see the slaughter pipeline thriving in. So definitely check into your own state laws, and then on a federal level, please support the SAFE Act. If the SAFE Act gets passed, and what the SAFE Act is they're adding equines to there's already a law there that states that you can't export dogs and cats for slaughter, and it is adding horses to that law. So it's not messing with the cattle industry or anything like that. It's just saying, let's not export equines for slaughter. And so please support that. Encourage your representatives to support the SAFE Act, and also take a chance and look into your own state laws and see what they are for horses, and encourage your decision makers to support the laws that would prevent some of the suffering that you saw in this podcast interview just with myself. But I did want to share what we're presenting. Obviously, I do a much more condensed presentation when I'm in Washington, D.C., but if we don't sit down with the decision makers and explain why these laws need to change, they're not going to change, and horses are going to continue to suffer, and they're beautiful, amazing animals, and they don't deserve that. So please do what you can to support changing laws for horses, because the horses need your support and your protection. And if we all come together as one solid voice and say enough is enough, horses in the United States should not be treated like this, laws will change and horses will be protected.